Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're going to be taking a look at a very improbable deck that went and won the US National Championships back in 2013, and it was all based around Klinklang. John Roberts went and won the US Nationals in 2013 with Klinklang, and I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, this was an extremely fun deck. And when I say improbable, I don't mean it was a bad deck, I just mean nobody actually thought it was going to happen, and then it went and happened. Now, the Klinklang in question was the one from Black and White that had the ability Shift Gear. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a metal energy attached to one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. And it's not like we'd never seen this ability before, and it's not like we'd ever seen it since. I mean, we've seen it with Aromatisse, and we've seen it with Hydreigon, and I'm not going to sit here and start shouting out every single Pokemon that's ever had it. We would be here for some time. The point is, it just moved your energy around. Now, it had an attack that flipped 2 coins and did 80 damage for each heads, which was fine. But it's not exactly like that was some game-winning attack. We barely ever used it. But you see, it was here for the ability. We did later on get the Klinklang from Plasma Storm that just made you immune to EX Pokemon. Yeah, that made the deck even better, but that wasn't what we saw at the US National Championships. What we saw was a bunch of special energy. And it really was all about the special energy. We had Rainbow Energy, obviously. Because here's the thing, right? Klinklang moved your metal energy. So any energy that counted as metal when attached, like for instance, Rainbow, would totally count here. But it wasn't just Rainbow, we also had Prism Energy. And you see, Prism Energy was just Rainbow Energy, where you didn't take the damage counter to attach it. Where you could just attach it with no downside whatsoever. Except that it could only be attached to basic Pokemon. Now, it's not that it could only be attached to basic Pokemon, but if it wasn't attached to a basic Pokemon, it was just an ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill, colorless energy. That's not so good, ladies and gentlemen. So what we essentially had was just 8 energy that could count as anything. And then you'd play a couple of metal energy for colorless cost, etc. And because they were the only 8 really you could play. And then we played a bunch of basic attackers that were able to take advantage of this and basically wreck any setup your opponent might have. And it involved both Kyogre and Groudon. But given that I just had a son a couple months ago and called him Archie, let's start with Kyogre. Now, for 2 energy, Kyogre had Smash Turn, 30 damage, switch to the bench, nobody really cares. But for 3 energy, including 1 colorless, so if you needed to use a metal there, you could, it had the attack Dual Splash that did 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. And this could take out a bunch of different things, but you see, back then, among the many decks that we had that were pretty good, we had some Vileplume decks. And Vileplume evolved from Oddish, and Oddish had, I think, 40 HP back then. Let's say 40 HP. What that means is that your opponent basically had to drop 3 Oddish in one go. It was definitely 40 HP. Or you could just KO both of them. Yeah, that was pretty gosh darn nice. But it's not good enough to just have Kyogre. We also had Groudon. These were the old ones that came around in Dark Explorers. And Groudon EX, well, it had the really nice attack Tromp. 2 energy, 20 damage, plus 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then 3 energy, 120 damage, if the defending Pokemon already had 2 or more damage counters on it. One thing we need to remember back then is that Darkrai was absolutely everywhere. Darkrai was absolutely huge. You needed to have a really good answer to Darkrai. So this was your answer to Darkrai. This was essentially what you would do. Spread a bit of damage in the early game or use Kyogre, and then come in and just finish them off using Groudon. It was kind of fun. Now, speaking of Darkrai, we played Darkrai. Now, Darkrai was actually probably most good here for the ability. Nothing that relevant was really weak to Darkness back then. But it gave free retreat to any Pokemon that had a Darkness energy attached. So that's any basic with Prism Energy, or any of your Pokemon whatsoever with Rainbow Energy. And it just literally gave them free retreat. You wanted to be able to switch around your Pokemon. Remember, Klinklang already let you move the energy. This let you move the Pokemon, so you could move one energy up to whatever was active, even if your opponent had played a Pokemon catcher to get it in the active, then free retreat, because of Darkrai, to whatever you wanted to attack with, and then just move the energy right back over. It did have a nice attack that did 90 to the active, 30 to one of the bench. But if you want to hit the bench, Kyogre's better. If you want to hit for big damage, we've got better Pokemon. And nothing was really weak to Darkrai. Although, to be fair, 90 to the active, 30 to the bench was still a very nice amount of damage to get onto the board. And we did play 2 Darkrai, because pretty important. The other Pokemon we played here in terms of an attacker was Cobalion, the one from Noble Victories. And energy press from Metal and a Colorless, doing 20 damage for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon, plus 20 base, was fine, but it wasn't really the reason we played it. The reason we played it was Iron Breaker. 80 damage for free energy, and the defending Pokemon can't attack during your opponent's next turn. Now, they could retreat or switch into a different Pokemon, you had to be ready for that. But otherwise, you could just buy yourself a turn, stop them attacking, life was good. We did also play 1 Shaman here, just to draw extra cards and set up. That's pretty gosh darned important. Now, the real hook of this deck was Max Potion. And we played 4 Max Potion, and for what it's worth, we also played 3 Junk Arm that allowed us to reuse the Max Potion. You see, this deck played no energy acceleration whatsoever, which means you were just manually attaching. Well, manually attaching is a little bit terrifying, ladies and gentlemen, because it means if you get a big one-hit KO, etc., it goes away. But we weren't in a one-hit KO format back then. That wasn't really a thing. We had a whole bunch of stuff like Darkrai, and we had a whole bunch of stuff like Mewtwo, but remember that Mewtwo would only do damage based on the amount of energy attached, so you could make sure that Mewtwo was never going to get a one-hit KO. We saw stuff like Tornadus, which again just wasn't doing enough damage to get a one-hit KO. And the point here is that you could basically make sure that your opponent would not one-hit KO, and you could switch between Pokemon so you weren't getting hit for weakness. And then, in theory, you would never get one-hit KO'd, which is nice. But what about 2-hit KOing? Max Potion. Max Potion removes all the damage from one of your Pokemon at the cost of losing all your energy. So use Klinklang to move all the energy off. Max Potion, discard all the energy. Oh, wait, there is none. Move all the energy right back on again. It was really rather wonderful. Now, to quickly run through the rest of the trainers, honestly, it wasn't that different from other decks at the time. Max Potion was your real hook here, although I should give a massive shout out to the Charizard Lounge, on which I found this particular deck list. In terms of supporters, we had Professor Oak's New Theory. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6, that's pretty big. N, both players shuffle a hand into their deck and draw cards equal to their remaining prizes. Good for you in terms of a bit of consistency, bad for your opponent if they take a big lead. And 1 copy of Copycat, so if your opponent had a large hand, you could copy it. We had a couple random receivers so that you could find those supporters. And actually, Eviolite was a really big deal here, because Eviolite, when attached to a basic Pokemon, meant that you took less damage from attacks. 20 damage, as it happens. But remember, all your attackers here are basic, and we really want to keep them alive, so Eviolite became pretty big. And actually, there was one other card that was a little bit unusual here. It was Heavy Ball. We played 4 copies of Heavy Ball. Why 4 copies of Heavy Ball? We'll find a Pokemon with a retreat cost of 3 or more. Groudon fits into that. Your Klinklang fits into that. Kyogre fits into that. You had a few that did, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we also played Pokemon Communication, just the one, to swap Pokemon that you don't want for Pokemon you do. We played Rare Candy, obviously that's fairly important given the whole, Stage 2 thing. And we played one copy of Revive to get a Pokemon back if you needed it. And a couple copies of Pokemon Catcher. I believe this was still before the errata for Pokemon Catcher, so it no longer needed a coin flip. And you could use Junk Arm to get it back. That's pretty huge, ladies and gentlemen. That's pretty huge. Now, the thing is, there were some really big counters to this deck. One deck that did see a little bit of play back then was Quad Entei EX. And obviously, your opponent could easily Pokemon Catcher and then just take out your Klinklang using Grand Flame really easily. And Accelerated Energy to boot. Quad Entei wrecked you. Similarly, some Darkrai decks out there were playing Enhanced Hammer. And Enhanced Hammer gets an automatic discard on a special energy. And remember, we still had Junk Arm back then. And the thing about Junk Arm is that you can just keep getting back those Enhanced Hammer. So if one deck is playing one random Enhanced Hammer, they can hurt you a bit. But if they're playing 3 or 4 Enhanced Hammer, plus maybe some Crushing Hammer with 3 or 4 Junk Arm, they would literally run you out of energy and you'd never get any good attacks off. The thing is, and the Charizard Lounge have crunched the numbers here, and they have estimated that we're talking something like 13% of the metagame being bad matchups, which means in a 9-round tournament you'd expect to play one of them. And then everything else is a pretty good matchup. That sounds pretty good to me, ladies and gentlemen. That sounds pretty good to me. And I mean, back then you were talking about stuff like Mewtwo decks, Tornadus decks, Darkrai decks, Terrakion decks, Eels decks. The kind of decks that just couldn't one-hit KO you. And when these decks couldn't one-hit KO you, they basically couldn't win. This was a very weird kind of deck. And it was a very nerve-wracking deck, and it did have some hard auto losses. But when you didn't hit one of those hard auto losses, it was a rather spectacular deck indeed. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Klinklang, World Nationals, good deck. But I'd like to know your memories of Klinklang. Did you play it? Did you play against it? Were you around for that US National Championships? What did you think when you saw Klinklang winning? And anything else you want to say about Klinklang, to be honest with you? Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we talk about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but do have awesome. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.